Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The gentle hum of the air conditioning filled the spacious living room of the Pacquiao mansion in General Santos City, as Manny sat quietly on his favorite leather chair, his weathered hands clasped together. The afternoon sun filtered through the large windows, casting warm golden rays across the polished marble floors. His eyes, those same determined eyes that had stared down countless opponents in boxing rings around the world, now held a different kind of intensity, the pure, unadulterated anticipation of a father waiting for his daughter. Princess had been in London for 8 months, pursuing her studies at a prestigious university. 8 months that felt like 8 years to Manny. Every video call, every text message, every shared photo had only amplified the ache in his chest. The house had felt different without her laughter echoing through the hallways, without her gentle presence that somehow always managed to soften the edges of his often chaotic world. Jinky moved gracefully through the house, her maternal instincts in full swing as she coordinated with their household staff. The aroma of Princess's favorite dishes began to waft from the kitchen, adobo prepared exactly the way she loved it, fresh lumpia that would remind her of home, and the special leche flan that had been her weakness since childhood. Every detail mattered. Every small gesture was a thread in the tapestry of welcome they were weaving for their beloved daughter. The other children could sense the electricity in the air. Jimuel, now a young man himself, had driven to the airport 3 times that week just to check traffic patterns and timing. Michael had spent hours organizing Princess's room, making sure everything was exactly as she had left it. Even little Israel, too young to fully understand the complexity of missing someone, seemed to absorb the excitement radiating from every corner of their home. Manny's phone buzzed constantly with updates from Princess's flight. Each notification made his heart skip slightly. He found himself checking the time repeatedly, calculating and recalculating her arrival. The legendary patience that had carried him through grueling training camps and marathon fights seemed to abandon him completely when it came to his daughter's homecoming. Outside, the familiar sounds of General Santos City continued their daily rhythm. Jeepneys honked in the distance, vendors called out their offerings, children played in the streets. But inside the Pacquiao home, time seemed suspended in a bubble of anticipation. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the moment when Princess would walk through those doors and fill the spaces that had felt empty for far too long. Manny stood up and walked to the window, his gaze scanning the street beyond their gates. He thought about all the championships he had won, all the crowds that had cheered his name, all the moments of glory that had defined his career. Yet none of those victories could compare to the simple joy of having his family complete again. The medals and belts displayed throughout their home suddenly seemed like mere objects compared to the living, breathing love that would soon walk through their front door. The late afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastels that reminded Manny of Princess's gentle nature. Soon, very soon, the waiting would be over. Soon their family would be whole again, and the house would remember what it felt like to be truly home. Princess Pacquiao shifted in her airplane seat, watching the clouds drift past the small window as the aircraft began its descent toward Ninoy Aquino International Airport. The 8-hour flight from London had given her plenty of time to reflect on the months she had spent abroad, but her mind kept wandering to the faces waiting for her at home, the academic achievements, the new friendships, the cultural experiences. All of it paled in comparison to the magnetic pull of family that had grown stronger with each passing day. Her laptop bag contained printed photos of her London adventures, carefully selected to share with her father. She knew Manny would want to see everything. The university campus where she had walked to classes through ancient courtyards, the small cafe where she had spent countless hours studying, the parks where she had found moments of peace when homesickness threatened to overwhelm her. But more than the sights and experiences, she carried with her a deeper appreciation for the values her parents had instilled in her, values that had become her anchor in a foreign land. Meanwhile, back in General Santos City, Manny found himself pacing through the house with an energy that reminded Jinky of his pre-fight rituals. He moved from room to room, adjusting picture frames, straightening cushions, ensuring everything looked perfect for Princess's return. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick with deliberate slowness, each second stretching like taffy in his consciousness. Jimuel had positioned himself as the family's logistics coordinator, his phone buzzing with flight tracking notifications. The real-time updates provided a strange comfort. Knowing exactly where Princess was at any given moment helped bridge the vast distance that had separated them for so long. Michael had taken charge of the younger children, organizing activities to help channel their excitement, while Jinky managed the final preparations for their daughter's homecoming feast. The aroma from the kitchen had intensified throughout the day. Rosario, their longtime cook, had been working since dawn, her experienced hands crafting each dish with the same dedication she had shown the family for over a decade. She understood the significance of this meal. It wasn't just about food, but about recreating the tastes and smells that would instantly transport Princess back to the comfort of home. Every grain of rice, every slice of pork in the adobo, every delicate wrapper of the fresh lumpia carried the weight of love and welcome. As the afternoon wore on, Manny found himself drawn repeatedly to Princess's bedroom. The space had been maintained exactly as she had left it, her books still arranged on the shelves, her favorite stuffed animals positioned carefully on the bed, her collection of family photos displayed on the dresser. Sunlight streamed through her windows, illuminating the room with the same gentle warmth that had watched over her childhood dreams. The sounds of the neighborhood began to shift as evening approached. The playful shouts of children gave way to the softer conversations of families gathering for dinner. Street vendors packed up their colorful displays, and the familiar rhythm of motorbikes and jeepneys created a symphony that Princess had missed more than she could have imagined. These were the sounds that no video call could capture, the auditory embrace of home that would soon wrap around her like a familiar blanket. Jinky paused in her preparations, catching sight of Manny through the kitchen doorway. His profile was silhouetted against the window, and she could see the tender vulnerability that only showed itself in these quiet family moments. The champion who had conquered boxing rings around the world was, at his core, simply a father missing his daughter, a universal truth that transcended all the fame and recognition that surrounded their lives. The final hours of waiting had begun. The black SUV cut through the evening traffic of Metro Manila as Manny gripped the steering wheel with the same focus he had once reserved for championship bouts. Beside him, Jinky checked her phone for the 100th time, monitoring Princess's flight status with maternal precision. The familiar chaos of the city's streets, vendors weaving between cars, colorful jeepneys packed with passengers, the endless symphony of horns and engines provided a strangely comforting backdrop to their journey toward Ninoy Aquino International Airport. 8 months of separation were about to end, and Manny could feel his heartbeat synchronizing with the rhythm of the windshield wipers as a light rain began to fall. The droplets on the glass created tiny prisms that scattered the neon lights of the city, transforming the urban landscape into something almost magical. He thought about all the times Princess had made this same journey in reverse, leaving home for school trips, competitions, and finally for London. But this time was different. This time, she was coming home to stay for the holidays. Behind them, the rest of the family filled 2 additional vehicles. Jimuel had insisted on driving the second car, with Michael and Queen Elizabeth as his passengers, while Israel rode with Dionysia, Manny's mother, whose excitement at seeing her granddaughter had been palpable all day. The convoy moved through the city like a small parade of anticipation, each family member lost in their own memories of Princess and their own visions of the reunion ahead. Princess's flight had landed 15 minutes early, and Manny knew she would be navigating through customs and immigration, probably exhausted from the long journey, but energized by the proximity to home. He imagined her pulling her luggage through the sterile corridors of the international terminal, perhaps catching glimpses of Filipino faces that reminded her of family, perhaps hearing familiar accents that made her heart skip with recognition. The airport came into view, its illuminated terminals rising against the darkening sky like beacons of reunion. Manny maneuvered the SUV into the designated pickup area, the familiar controlled chaos of arriving passengers and waiting families unfolding around them. Taxi drivers called out destinations, families embraced returning relatives, and the air filled with the beautiful cacophony of Tagalog conversations mixed with excited English phrases. Inside the terminal, Princess retrieved her luggage from the carousel, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out her phone to send the message her family was waiting for. The weight of her suitcases felt insignificant compared to the emotional gravity pulling her toward the exit doors. She had changed during her time in London, grown more independent, more confident, more aware of the world beyond the Philippines. But in this moment, she was simply a daughter, eager to return to the embrace of home. Manny stepped out of the vehicle, his eyes scanning the automatic doors that would soon part to reveal his daughter. Other families around him created similar tableau of anticipation. Children holding welcome signs, grandparents clutching flowers, spouses checking their appearances in car mirrors. The universal language of love and reunion played out in dozens of personal dramas across the pickup area. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt gleaming under the terminal lights. Steam rose gently from the warm pavement, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed appropriate for such a significant moment. Manny adjusted his shirt, ran his fingers through his hair, and felt the familiar pre-fight butterflies dancing in his stomach. But these were butterflies of joy, of completion, of a family circle about to close once again. The doors remained closed, but Manny could sense that any moment now, they would open to reveal the face he had missed more than any championship belt or standing ovation. The automatic doors of the international arrivals area slid open with a soft, mechanical whisper, and Manny's entire world seemed to compress into that single moment of revelation. Princess emerged through the threshold, her silhouette framed against the bright fluorescent lights of the terminal behind her. She looked taller somehow, more poised, carrying herself with a confidence that spoke of the independence she had cultivated during her months abroad. But when her eyes found Manny's across the crowded pickup area, that sophisticated young woman melted away, replaced by the little girl who had once fallen asleep in his arms after his training sessions. Time suspended itself in crystalline perfection. The noise of the bustling airport, announcements over loudspeakers, conversations in multiple languages, the rumble of rolling luggage, faded into white noise as father and daughter locked eyes across the distance. Princess's face broke into a smile that rivaled the terminal's brightest lights, and Manny felt 8 months of accumulated longing surge through his chest like a tidal wave of pure emotion. She moved toward them with quick, purposeful steps, her luggage trailing behind her like faithful companions on this final leg of her journey home. Manny found his feet carrying him forward without conscious thought, his boxer's coordination abandoned in favor of the clumsy urgency of a father's love. The space between them dissolved with each step, the airport crowd unconsciously parting to allow this private drama to unfold in their public space. When they finally collided in embrace, Manny felt the solid reality of his daughter in his arms, no longer the pixelated image on a video call or the voice crackling through international phone lines, but warm, breathing, present flesh and blood. Princess seemed smaller in his arms than he remembered, and yet somehow stronger too. Her hair carried unfamiliar scents that spoke of foreign places and new experiences, but underneath those foreign notes was the essential essence of his daughter that no distance could ever change. Jinky reached them moments later, her own tears flowing freely as she wrapped both father and daughter in her embrace. The family circle expanded as Jimuel, Michael, Queen Elizabeth, and little Israel joined the huddle, creating a human constellation of reunion right there on the polished airport floor. Other passengers and waiting families smiled as they passed, recognizing the universal beauty of homecoming playing out before them. Princess pulled back slightly to look at each family member, her eyes drinking in faces she had memorized through countless video calls but hadn't seen in 3 dimensions for what felt like a lifetime. Manny studied her features, cataloging the subtle changes that 8 months had wrought. There was a new maturity in her expression, a worldliness that spoke of late nights in library study rooms and navigating foreign social customs. But her smile remained exactly the same, the radiant expression that had lit up his world since the day she was born. The practical business of collecting luggage and navigating back to their vehicles provided a welcome transition from the intensity of first reunion. Princess moved through these mundane tasks with a kind of wonder, as if seeing familiar procedures through new eyes. The humid Manila air, heavy with the sense of cooking food and tropical vegetation, seemed to embrace her like an old friend. Even the controlled chaos of airport traffic patterns felt like a symphony of home after months of London's different urban rhythms. As they loaded her suitcases into the SUV, Manny caught glimpses of the life she had built abroad, university stickers on her laptop bag, a London transport card tucked into her phone case, clothing that reflected European fashion sensibilities. These artifacts of her independent life filled him with pride even as they reminded him of how much she had grown during their separation. The drive home stretched ahead of them, promising hours of stories and updates, of reconnection and readjustment. But for now, as Princess settled into the familiar passenger seat beside him, Manny felt the deep satisfaction of a circle closing, of a family made whole again under the warm embrace of a Manila evening sky. The convoy of vehicles pulled away from the airport, carrying Princess back into the embrace of her homeland. Manny adjusted his rearview mirror to catch glimpses of his daughter's face as she pressed against the passenger window, absorbing the familiar yet somehow transformed landscape of Metro Manila. 8 months in London had sharpened her perception, making her notice details that had once been invisible through the lens of daily familiarity. The vibrant colors of jeepney art, the graceful chaos of street vendors, the warm resilience painted across every face they passed. Princess's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends who had learned of her return, but she barely glanced at the screen. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by the rhythm of home unfolding outside her window. The scent of grilled corn from roadside vendors, mixed with the exhaust fumes and tropical humidity, creating an olfactory symphony that no European city could replicate. She had forgotten how alive the Philippines felt, how every street corner pulsed with entrepreneurial energy and human connection. Manny navigated the familiar routes with practiced ease, but his attention remained divided between the road and the miracle of his daughter's presence beside him. He could sense the subtle changes in her, the way she held herself with new confidence, the thoughtful way she observed their surroundings, the mature grace that had replaced the eager restlessness of her teenage years. London had polished her like a precious stone, revealing facets that had always existed, but needed distance and challenge to fully emerge. Behind them, the rest of the family maintained their protective formation, Jimuel expertly managing traffic while keeping pace with his father's vehicle. Queen Elizabeth had fallen asleep against Michael's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the reunion, while little Israel maintained a steady stream of excited chatter about all the things he wanted to show his big sister. Dionysia rode in quiet contentment, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of seeing her family reassemble. As they left the urban density of Manila behind and entered the more familiar territory approaching General Santos City, Princess began to recognize landmarks that marked the progression toward home. The mountains in the distance, their peaks shrouded in evening mist, stood like ancient sentinels welcoming her return. The rice fields stretching toward the horizon carried the same geometric beauty she remembered, but now she appreciated them with eyes that had seen Westminster Abbey and the Thames, making her realize how uniquely beautiful her homeland truly was. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that seemed specifically designed for homecomings, deep oranges bleeding into soft purples, with wisps of clouds catching the light like brushstrokes on an infinite canvas. Princess had photographed countless London sunsets, but none had carried the emotional weight of this particular evening light. This was the same sun that had watched over her childhood, the same sky that had sheltered her dreams and ambitions before the world had expanded to include foreign universities and international experiences. Manny felt the deep satisfaction of a pilgrimage completed as familiar neighborhoods began to appear outside their windows. The security guard at their subdivision gate waved with genuine warmth, his face breaking into a smile of recognition as he spotted Princess in the passenger seat. Even these small interactions felt significant, threads in the tapestry of community that had been temporarily loosened but never broken during her absence. The house came into view as they turned the final corner, its windows glowing with warm light against the deepening dusk. Princess could see that nothing had changed in the architecture or landscaping, but somehow everything felt different through her evolved perspective. This was no longer just the house where she had grown up. It was the anchor point of a global identity, the foundation that had given her the strength to venture into the wider world and the magnet that had drawn her safely home. As Manny pulled into their driveway, he felt the profound completion that only comes when all the essential pieces of life arrange themselves in their proper places, creating a picture of wholeness that no achievement or recognition could ever match. The front door of the Pacquiao home opened with the same gentle creak that had marked Princess's departures and arrivals throughout her childhood. But tonight, That familiar sound carried the weight of 8 months of anticipation. As she stepped across the threshold, Princess felt the immediate embrace of home, not just the physical structure of walls and rooms, but the intangible essence of belonging that permeated every corner of this space that had shaped her earliest memories. The aroma hit her first, a symphony of familiar scents that made her knees weak with recognition. The fragrance of jasmine rice, perfectly steamed and waiting in the kitchen, mingled with the rich complexity of her mother's adobo. But underneath those immediate food aromas lay the deeper, more subtle sense of home. The particular combination of furniture polish, fresh flowers, and the indefinable essence that made this house distinctly theirs. London had offered many sophisticated fragrances, but none had carried the power to transport her through time the way these simple domestic scents could. Manny watched his daughter's face as she absorbed the visual feast that Jinky and the household staff had prepared. Fresh Sampaguita flowers adorned every surface, their delicate white petals creating pathways of welcome throughout the living spaces. The family photographs had been dusted and rearranged to prominently feature images of Princess, creating a visual narrative of her life from toddlerhood to her recent university adventures. Even the furniture seemed to have been positioned with extra care, as if the house itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale now that she was home. Princess moved through the familiar rooms with a kind of reverent wonder, touching surfaces and objects that had once been merely functional, but now felt sacred through the lens of prolonged absence. The piano, where she had practiced scales as a child, gleamed under careful polishing, sheet music still arranged exactly as she had left it. Her collection of books remained precisely organized on the family room shelves, waiting patiently for her return, like faithful friends who had refused to abandon their posts during her absence. In the dining room, the table had been set with their finest china and crystal, transforming their everyday eating space into something approaching a banquet hall. Candles flickered in hurricane glass, casting dancing shadows on the walls and creating an atmosphere of celebration that elevated this simple family dinner to the level of ceremony. Princess could see that every detail had been considered, every element chosen to communicate the depth of love and welcome that words could never adequately express. Manny followed his daughter's progress through their home, seeing familiar spaces through her eyes and marveling at how exile had made her appreciate details that daily life had rendered invisible. The way afternoon light fell through the living room windows, the exact shade of blue that Jinky had chosen for the accent walls, the comfortable arrangement of furniture that invited conversation and connection, all of it seemed to register with Princess as if she was seeing it for the first time. The sounds of home gradually reasserted themselves as the family settled into their natural rhythms. The gentle hum of air conditioning, the distant sounds of evening traffic, the familiar creaking of the house settling into night. These acoustic fingerprints of home had been impossible to recreate in her London dormitory, no matter how many recordings or video calls had attempted to bridge the distance. As Princess made her way toward her bedroom, Manny felt a profound sense of restoration settling over his household. The 8-month interruption in their family constellation was ending, and he could almost feel the house itself sighing with contentment as it welcomed back one of its essential occupants. This was more than just a daughter returning from university. This was the completion of a circle, the healing of a wound that no one had wanted to acknowledge during her absence. The evening ahead promised conversations and updates, laughter and storytelling. But for now, the simple fact of Princess's presence filled every room with a warmth that no heating system could replicate. The dining room transformed into a cathedral of connection as the Pacquiao family gathered around their table for the first complete meal they had shared in 8 months. Princess took her customary seat, the chair that had remained symbolically empty during her absence, and Manny felt a profound sense of order restoration as the family constellation aligned itself properly once again. The flickering candlelight cast warm shadows across faces that reflected varying degrees of the same fundamental emotion, pure, undiluted joy at being together. Jinky had orchestrated the meal with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Each dish carried significance beyond its nutritional value. The adobo prepared exactly according to Princess's childhood preferences. The fresh lumpia wrapped with the care typically reserved for precious gifts. The rice cooked to the perfect texture that would complement every other flavor on the table. This was not merely dinner, it was a communion, a reaffirmation of bonds that distance had tested but never broken. Princess found herself overwhelmed by the sensory richness of the moment. The taste of home flooded her palate with the first bite, triggering memories that had been carefully preserved, but never fully accessible during her months abroad. The particular sweetness of Filipino-style spaghetti, the perfect balance of soy sauce and vinegar in the adobo, the delicate crunch of vegetables in the fresh spring rolls, each flavor note played its part in a culinary symphony that welcomed her back to her cultural identity. Manny observed his daughter's reactions with the intensity he had once reserved for studying opponents before important fights. He catalogued the subtle changes that 8 months had wrought, the more deliberate way she moved her hands when eating, the thoughtful pauses she took between bites, the mature appreciation she showed for food that she had once taken for granted. London had taught her to savor rather than simply consume, and this evolution filled him with pride, even as it reminded him of how much growing up had occurred during their separation. Around the table, conversations flowed in the comfortable patterns of family intimacy. Jimuel shared updates about his own pursuits, Michael described recent school achievements, and Queen Elizabeth chatted about friends and activities that had filled the months of Princess's absence. Little Israel positioned himself as close to his returned sister as possible, as if physical proximity could guarantee that she would never leave again. Even Dionysia, normally reserved during family meals, seemed energized by the completeness of having all her grandchildren present. The evening light outside gradually faded to deep purple, and the warm glow from their dining room windows created a beacon of family warmth against the gathering darkness. Princess glanced occasionally toward those windows, seeing her own reflection layered over the tropical landscape beyond, and marveled at how perfectly she fit back into this picture that had felt incomplete during her absence. Manny found his attention divided between the immediate pleasure of the meal and deeper reflections about the nature of family bonds. Princess's 8-month absence had taught him something profound about love, that true connection transcends physical distance, that the strongest relationships are those that can survive separation and emerge even stronger. Watching his daughter navigate the familiar rhythms of family dinner with new appreciation made him realize that her time abroad had not taken her away from them, but had instead given her the perspective to value what they shared. The meal progressed with the unhurried pace of an evening that no one wanted to end. Each course provided another opportunity for reconnection, another chance to bridge the gap between the daughter, who had left 8 months ago, and the young woman who had returned. Princess's laughter rang through the dining room, with the same musical quality that had filled their home throughout her childhood. But now it carried undertones of worldly experience that added richness to its familiar melody. As the final dishes were cleared and the family lingered over dessert, Manny felt the deep satisfaction of a pilgrimage completed, a circle closed, a family made whole once again under the gentle protection of their shared roof. The house settled into its nighttime rhythm with a contentment that seemed to emanate from its very foundation. Princess had retired to her bedroom an hour earlier, needing time to reconnect with the private space that had remained frozen in time during her absence. Manny could hear the gentle sounds of her moving about upstairs, drawers opening and closing, the soft footsteps of someone reacquainting herself with familiar territory, the occasional creak of floorboards that had witnessed her entire childhood. From his position in the living room, Manny gazed out at the garden where security lights cast gentle pools of illumination across the landscape. The same mango tree that had shaded Princess's childhood games stood sentinel in the darkness, its branches heavy with fruit that would ripen in the coming weeks. Everything in their world had continued its natural cycles during her absence, but tonight felt like the first time in 8 months that the garden, the house, and the family were all breathing in harmony again. Jinky moved quietly through the house, performing the evening rituals that marked the transition from day to night. Her movements carried a lightness that had been absent during Princess's absence, as if a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted from her shoulders. The mother's instinct to have all her children safely under one roof had been restored, and the house itself seemed to respond to this completeness with an almost audible sigh of satisfaction. In Princess's room, surrounded by possessions that had patiently awaited her return, she unpacked her suitcases with the deliberate care of someone creating a bridge between two versions of herself. London souvenirs found places alongside childhood mementos, university textbooks nestled next to Filipino novels she had missed reading, and photographs from her European adventures joined the gallery of family pictures that had always adorned her walls. Manny reflected on the transformation he had witnessed during the evening. His daughter had returned not as the same young woman who had left 8 months earlier, but as an evolved version of herself, more confident, more worldly, yet somehow more appreciative of the foundation that had made her journey possible. The independence she had cultivated abroad had not distanced her from family, but had instead deepened her understanding of what family truly meant. The sounds of the neighborhood beyond their gates provided a familiar lullaby: distant traffic, the gentle hum of air conditioning units, the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. These were the acoustic fingerprints of home that no foreign city could replicate, the subtle symphony that had played in the background of Princess's childhood and would continue long after she established her own independent life. As midnight approached, Manny made his way upstairs to check on his family one final time before retiring. He paused outside Princess's door, hearing the soft rustle of bed sheets and the gentle breathing that indicated she was settling into sleep. 8 months of video calls and international phone conversations had ended with the simple reality of his daughter sleeping safely in her childhood bedroom, protected by the same walls that had sheltered her dreams since birth. The house embraced them all in its quiet darkness, holding the Pacquiao family in the same protective embrace that had weathered victories and defeats, celebrations and challenges, departures, and now this precious homecoming. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, fresh discoveries about the young woman Princess had become, and the gradual process of weaving her London experiences into the family narrative. But tonight, as Manny finally closed his eyes in his own bed, he felt the profound peace that comes from having all the essential pieces of his world arranged in their proper places. The champion who had conquered boxing rings around the globe had achieved his greatest victory, the simple, irreplaceable triumph of family love reunited under one roof, complete and whole once again. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.